Hi, greetings. It's me, Dr. Paul Gerhardt, and this is video number 12 of our Human Resource Management series. If you haven't checked out the other videos, you might want to go over those. Each of these videos really are kind of independent of each other, but this particular video is going to talk about establishing pay structure. And in my book, Diversity at Work, I talk about that pay is a motivator, but it is not the only motivator. And as human resource professionals or potential human resource professionals, you really have to understand different ways of looking at pay in terms of structure, level of pay, and other considerations like legal requirements, for instance, or economic forces. So we all have a perception of we want to be treated fairly, and the bigger picture is if you are a manager in an organization, you want to hire the best employee for every position out there to help your team be as strong as it possibly could be, right? So you really have to be able to understand legal requirements for pay policies and how to make the best decision when establishing a pay structure. If you're in human resources, it's your goal to be able to have these conversations with managers and help use the right tools so that they can get the most benefit from working with each employee and making sure that they're attracting and maintaining employees. It costs quite a bit of money to hire and train an employee. The literature says about 2 years worth of wages in order to bring an employee up to speed with the people that they're replacing. And so really recognizing that pay truly is an important factor, and what you need to do is understand how important it is and be able to recognize the tools that you have to use in structuring pay. So pay truly is a powerful tool for meeting an organizational goals. And generally speaking, it costs a company between 5% or 40% of their revenues. Pay has a large impact on employee attitude and behaviors, and it influences the kind of people who are attracted or remain with the organization. So employees truly do attach great importance to pay decisions when they evaluate their relationship with their employers. So some people love their jobs but recognize that they can find jobs elsewhere and make a little bit more money. So definitely pay is an important consideration. So pay has an effect on the organization itself. Too much money on wages lowers the resources that are available. So there are pay policies and practices in the United States that are subject to governmental laws and regulations. And just as competing businesses may not be conspiring to set prices, they may not conspire to set wage rates also. So job structure, pay structure, and pay level are all decisions that are considered. Relative pay for different jobs within the organization is what structure is all about. Pay structure is a pay policy resulting from job structure and pay level decisions. And pay level is the average amount the organization pays for a particular job. So when you're establishing pay structure, it really is about a process of making decisions about individuals' employees' pay by grouping together employees with similar jobs. HR professionals need to develop structure based on legal requirements, market forces, and organizational goals. So legal requirements, you have to consider the equal pay for equal work, minimum wage, overtime pay, and restrictions on child labor. As far as market forces are concerned, that's product markets and labor markets. In different areas of the world, you may have people who produce, I'll say, widgets. And because there are so many widget makers in the Pacific Northwest, maybe their wages are lower and in an area where there aren't enough widget makers to go around. Okay, bad example. Organizational goals. If your goal is to have a high quality workforce, I know that this is something like Microsoft and Google and probably Amazon, some of the big names in corporate America. They want to have the best so that they can maintain, their share of the market. Have cost control is a big feature in a lot of organizations. They need to pay stakeholders, shareholders, and so they keep the costs low by keeping wages low. Maybe that's their model. Some organizational goals are they need to be seen as equitable and fair, and legal compliance is a big consideration. So all of these things affect pay level decisions, job structure decisions, and pay structure decisions. So you're considering pay rates, pay grades, pay ranges, and pay differentials, and we're going to talk about those terms here in a little bit. But first, let's talk about equal employment opportunity. Employers must not base differences in pay on an employee's age, sex, race, or other protected statuses. There's no guarantee of equal pay for men and women, white minorities, or any other group, and comparable worth policies need to be considered, and the Lilly Ledbetter Pay Act of 2009. Under the laws governing equal opportunity, employers may not base differences on employees based on those things that I talked about: age, sex, race, and other protected statuses. Any differences in pay must instead be tied to such business-related considerations as job responsibilities and performance. The goal for employees is to provide equal pay for equal work. Job descriptions, job structures, pay structures can help the organization demonstrate that they've been upholding these laws. These laws do not guarantee equal pay for men and women, whites and minorities, and other groups, because so many legitimate factors from education, choice of occupation, those things affect a person's earnings. So among full-time workers a few years ago, women on average earned 73 cents for every dollar earned by men. Among male employees, black workers earned 76 cents for every dollar earned by white workers, and Hispanic workers earned just 67 cents. That's a racial gap among black and Hispanic females, and that also exists at 84 and 73 cents per dollar respectively. Two employees who do the same job cannot be paid different wages because of race or age. Only if there are differences in their experience, skills, seniority, or job performance. Those are the only legal reasons why there might be pay differences. The legal requirements for pay, some things to consider, are a minimum wage. And that is the lowest amount that employers may pay under federal or state laws stated in an amount. And so there is an always changing federal minimum wage, and in some states there's a minimum state minimum wage. And so at the state level, if you're in a particular state, you need to understand what that minimum wage is. The Fair Labor Standards Act, or as we always call it, the FLSA, establishes a minimum wage and requirement for overtime pay and also child labor. So if in the workplace the people are earning overtime, they're working under the Fair Labor Standards Act, and likewise the regulations for child labor too. So the FLSA establishes a minimum wage, and it also permits a lower training wage. So right now, workers under the age of 20, you can pay them up to 90 days a lower wage. And that is approximately about 85% of the minimum wage. So there's a little caveat for FLSA. Overtime pay rates under the FLSA is 1.5 times the employee's usual hourly rate, including any bonuses and piece rate payments. So exempt employees like managers, outside salespeople, and other employees are not covered under FLSA requirements for overtime. Non-exempt employees are covered by FLSA requirements for overtime. So here's how you would compute overtime. You take their base pay, say in this case it's $12 an hour, plus of their how many hours they work. Employees' hours, say they work 50 hours and they're paid on a structure of 40 hours of work, that's 10 hours of overtime. So you would figure what it is. It'd be $12 an hour times 40 hours. That's $480 for the sake of math. And a bonus of $40. Say they make a bonus of $40 a week, that their total wages are $520. So 520 divided by 40 means that that employee technically makes $13 an hour. Well, $13 an hour times 1.5 means that their overtime rate is $19.50. And remember, in this particular scenario, I said that they worked 50 hours, so that means they had 10 hours of overtime. So that'd be $19.50 times 10. And so you take their base weekly rate of $520, that includes a $40 bonus, and you add 195, which comes out to 715 in this example. So with child labor, here's some things that you need to understand. Children aged 16 and 17 may not be employed in hazardous occupations defined by the U.S. Department of Labor. So there's a list. Children under age 14 and 15 may work only outside school hours in jobs defined as non-hazardous and for limited times. Children under age 14 may not be employed in any work associated with interstate commerce, and the exemptions include babysitting, acting, and delivering newspapers. So prevailing wages. These laws do not cover all companies. So the Davis-Bacon covers construction contractors that receive more than $2,000 in federal money, and the Walsh-Healy covers all government contracts receiving $10,000 or more in federal funds. So that's the two of the ones that are related to federal contracts. Economic influences. So product markets are something that need to be considered in labor markets. With product markets, the organization's product market includes organizations that offer competitive goods and services. Organizations compete on quality, service, and price, and cost of labor is a significant part of an organization's costs. So with labor markets, organizations must compete to obtain human resources in labor markets. So competing for labor establishes a minimum an organization must pay to hire an employee for a particular job. So here an example is like nurses, for instance. There's a strong demand for nurses in the labor market. So now hospitals have to pay competitive wages and other perks in order to attract and retain employees. So with pay level, you have to really understand what it is that you need to pay. You know, wages really depend on the competitive environment. Market rate versus paying above market rate to acquire top talent. And pay policies are one of the most important human resource tools for encouraging desired employees' behaviors and discouraging undesired behaviors. So we use benchmarking, And this is a procedure in which an organization compares its own practices against those of successful competitors, and they use pay surveys. The Bureau of Labor Statistics, or BLS, the Society for Human Resource Management, or SHRM, or SHRM, and World at Work are all resources that help inform organizations about what kinds of pay is available. Judging fairness. Employees compare their pay and contributions against three basic yardsticks. One, what they think employees in other organizations earn for doing the same job. Two, what they think other employees holding different jobs within the organization earn for doing work at the same or different levels. And three, what they think other employees in the organization earn for doing the same job as theirs. So developing pay structure in an organization really is about keeping in mind what employees' opinions about fairness looks like. After all, one purpose of pay really is to motivate employees. And if they feel they're in an unfair situation, they may steal from you or they may leave. You want employees to be happy, and pay is a big consideration, right? So the ways employees respond to their impressions about equity can have a great impact on organizations. To decide whether a level of pay is equitable, the person compares her ratio of outcomes and inputs with other people's outcome inputs ratios. Typically, if employees see their pay as equitable, their attitudes and behaviors continue to be unchanged. If employees see themselves as receiving an advantage, they usually rethink the situation to see it as merely equitable. So if employees conclude that they are under-rewarded, they are likely to make up the differences in three different ways. So one, they might put forth less effort, reducing their inputs. Two, they might find ways to increase their outcomes, like stealing. And three, they might withdraw by leaving the organization or refusing to cooperate. So employees' beliefs about fairness also influence their willingness to accept transfers and promotions. So when in communicating fairness, employees' feelings about their pay relative to others are based on what they perceive. Companies should assume that shared knowledge includes pay. And the internet makes it easy to gather wage and salary data. So, relative value of jobs. Job evaluation is an administrative procedure for measuring relative internal worth of organizations' jobs. And you have to look at compensable factors, like 5 characteristics of a job that the organization values and chooses to pay for, like experience, education, complexity, working conditions, and then responsibility. And each of these things can be put out in a table for you to be able to weigh it out for each job. For instance, you could look at, let's look at some computer-related jobs: computer operator, computer programmer, and a systems analyst. So with these compensatable factors, you need to look at experience, education, and then the complexity of these jobs. And so you'd have to give some sort of even rating scale in order to do it. Maybe a computer operator has a compensatable factor of 40. Education is kind of minimal at 30. And complexity of the job is 40. Not the hardest, not the easiest. Computer programs, the complexity as a programmer probably is a lot higher than an operator. Education level probably a little more higher, so maybe that would be a 50. And experience probably about the same. With a systems analyst, The more experience, the better they can be. So maybe that experience level would have a 65 as compared to 40. Education, probably have to have more education, so that would be a 60. And then complexity, probably a lot more complex, so that would be an 85. So as you total each of those up, you can take a look at different levels for pay reasons. So key jobs that have relatively stable content and are common among organizations. Organizations define key jobs to help create pay structures, and then pay can be based on survey data. So when looking at different jobs, you can look at hourly wage, piecework rate, and salary. So hourly wage is pay in terms of rate per hour. Piecework is rate per each unit that's produced, and then salary is the rate pay per month. So with pay rates, you have to be able to determine salaries for non-key jobs, and then pay policy line reflects pay structured for the market. With pay grades, these are sets of jobs having similar worth or content grouped together to establish pay rates, and they may not match the market rate. And so you can figure out, based on similar jobs, where you are going to base your pay. And so it's all about, the higher the point level, the higher the level, as we talked about before. So pay ranges are a set of possible pay rates that are defined by minimum and maximum and midpoint pay for employees holding a particular job within a particular pay grade. Red circle rate is a pay at rate that falls above pay range for that job, and then a green circle rate is a pay rate that falls below a pay range for a particular job. Just sharing some terms with you. You also have to consider pay differentials, and these are adjustments to pay rate that reflect differences in working conditions and labor markets. And many businesses in the U.S. provide pay differentials based on geographic location. The most common approach is to move an employee higher in pay structure to compensate for higher living costs. So I live in Washington State, and so people who work in Bellevue probably make a higher wage rate because the cost of living is there than people who work in, say, Yakima, Washington, where the jobs are a little bit different, or the cost of living is a little bit different. So night hours are usually seen as less desirable for most workers. So some companies pay a differential for night work and compensate them, for example. Some alternatives to job-based pay are delayering. So this is about reducing the number of levels in an organization's job structure. Most assignments are combined into a single layer called broadbands, and more emphasis on acquiring experience rather than promotions. So with skill-based pay systems, it's a pay structure that sets pay according to employees' level or skill or knowledge and what they're capable of doing. And you approximate where changing technologies require employees to continually widen and deepen their knowledge. So a lot of technology jobs are that way. Compa ratio. This is a term where there is a ratio of average pay to midpoint of pay range. If the average equals midpoint, the comp ratio is 1. If the comp ratio is greater than 1, the average pay is above midpoint. If the comp ratio is less than 1, the average pay is below midpoint. So in finding a comp ratio, say it's got a mid-range of 2175 salary, and you took into consideration salaries of employees in a pay grade. Employee 1 might make $2,300. Employee 2 makes $2,000. Employee 3 makes $2,500. Employee 4 makes $2,400. You would add all of the salaries together and then divide them by the number of employees. In this case I mentioned 4, which gives you a comp ratio of like 1.7. So if you add all the wages together and then divide it by that number, you get your midpoint. So during something to consider is that some employees are employees of the United States military. And you have to consider how companies should handle employees who are called for active duty in the military for an extended period of time. You have to really understand the Uniformed Services Employment and Reemployment Rights Act. And you want to be fair because it is a legal obligation. Pay for executives is another thing in pay that's got to be considered for your organization, and you have to really understand how the equity theory, which we just talked about, affects employees as a whole. What's really interesting is that the average chief executive officer has a median compensation of about $362,000, and that's significantly higher than most other employees, and that's just their base rate. About 14% of their total income comes from their salary, but 22% is based on bonuses, and 64% is based on stock and stock options. So being a CEO really can pay off, but you always consider how other employees see that, and if your CEO leaves, how can you attract another qualified leader to work for that? And so everything is based on perception. So anyway, I've given you a lot to think about. Establishing a pay structure is one of the important considerations for human resource managers. I hope there was something in this video that you could take away and use in your life for your own information. I encourage you to watch the other videos if you haven't done so. And more than anything else, I hope that you have a great day, because only you get to choose how you feel about it. I'm Dr. Paul Gerhardt.